Welcome to the forum for candidates for the November 5th general election for Minnesota House District 35A. The forum is being recorded by QCTV for multiple showings. Thank you, QCTV. Editing is only authorized for official media reporting excerpts. Edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan political purposes. Meet the Candidate Forums are held without a live audience, and viewers' questions were submitted online for the candidates. I'm Sandy Connor, the forum moderator and a member of League of Women Voters, Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area, the sponsor of this forum. I live in Minnesota House District 32B, so I can't vote for any of these candidates. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose any political parties or candidates for office. I'm sure each candidate cares very much who you vote for, but the League does not. The League does hope that each of you will vote. The goal of our forums is to help citizens become informed voters. The candidates for Minnesota House District 35A are Zack Stephenson and Josh Jungling. All candidates for this race were invited to participate in the forum. Candidate Josh Jungling was unable to or chose not to attend. Welcome to Minnesota House District 35A candidate Zack Stephenson. In lieu of opening statements, we will begin with 2 questions which were provided to the candidate in advance. This will be followed by questions from the public which were submitted in advance. We will end with a closing statement from the candidate. For the first 2 questions, answers are limited to 90 seconds. Candidate Stephenson, what is your motivation to run for this office, and what experience or knowledge would help you to serve effectively?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for having this forum tonight. These forums are so valuable to our communities to educate people as they get ready to make a very important decision this fall. So I appreciate you moderating and hosting this forum tonight. So my name is Zack Stephenson. I'm a lifelong resident of Anoka County. I grew up a mile down the road from the house I live in now. I didn't get very far in life. My wife is a teacher at Coon Rapids High School. We have 2 daughters who are 9 and 11. I work as a prosecutor when the legislature is not in session. My first job out of college was working for U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and I learned a lot working from Amy about how important it is to work hard and listen and reach across the aisle. And I think that's part of the reason why, as a state legislator now for 3 terms, I've been very effective. I've passed 79 bills in those 3 years. And those bills range from things that are very important to our local community, like we fixed Highway 10 and we created the Anoka Social District. We expanded the Coon Rapids Recycling Center, and we took the first steps towards building a new crossing over the Mississippi River. But to other things that affect the entire state, like bringing down the costs of prescription drugs, cracking down on white-collar crime, and helping people to afford their energy bills. So I think that I bring a lot of knowledge about how to get things done, willingness to listen and work across the aisle to try and reach consensus whenever possible, and a strong dedication to our community.
Thank you. What are your goals for the future of Minnesota House District 35A?
Well, the whole reason why I've run for office is because I want Coon Rapids and Anoka to be as good for my daughters and for everybody's kids as it was for me growing up in Coon Rapids and Anoka. It was a great place to grow up. It's a great place to raise a family today still, and I want it to stay that way. So I want us to have a phenomenal education system in our area. That's what makes Minnesota work best. And unfortunately, I think there's been some slippage there in recent years. Class sizes are soaring. My wife's classes are 35 to 36 kids at Coon Rapids High School. That's just way too big. I also want it to be a safe community, and it is a safe community, but we have to keep working on that all the time, and that's why I was felt so strongly about getting more funding for our local police departments. And I got $1 million in new funding for the Anoka Police Department and $2 million for the Coon Rapids Police Department in this last session. And then the third thing, it has to be an affordable place to live. And that's what I'm hearing most about when I'm out door knocking these days, is people being concerned about the rising cost of living. And so we need to go after price gouging corporations to try and get those prices under control. We also need to build more housing so people can afford to buy their own home. We need to preserve and expand our nation-leading child tax credit that we passed last year. And we need to preserve and expand the elimination of the tax on Social Security benefits that we passed last year in the session, too.
Thank you, Candidate Stephenson. I will now ask the candidate to respond to questions submitted by the public. Responses are limited to 1 minute. Given that the funding bill failed last year, how will you work to ensure that needed projects in this area get the funding they need for the next 2 years?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you have to keep at it year after year. Some of these projects take a long time to get across the finish line, but an example would be Highway 10. Where we've been working for many years. When I first took office, Highway 10 was a catastrophe. It has more traffic every day than 35W, but it had stoplights on it. Can you imagine if there were stoplights on 35W? Outrageous. But we kept at it year in and year out, sometimes in years when bonding bills passed and sometimes when they didn't. And now we've gotten rid of all of the stoplights in Anoka and Ramsey, and we're going to add a third lane on Highway 10 between Hanson and Round Lake next summer. And that's as a consequence of persistence, but also being willing to reach across the aisle and find partners who are willing to work with you. And the good news is here in the northern suburbs, we have a great collection of legislators from both parties who are willing to work together. But you're right, because there are a lot of needs in this community, whether it's increased transportation options, a new river crossing between Ramsey and Dayton to take pressure off of 169 and east congestion in downtown Anoka, or fixing the Rum River Dam is a big project that I care a lot about this year.
Should changes be made to the gun laws to ensure that both the need for public safety and the rights of gun owners are protected? If so, what changes?
You know, when the legislature is not in session, I work as a prosecutor, and so gun violence is something I'm very familiar with, and I've seen what happens when guns get into the hands of people who shouldn't have them. You know, the Second Amendment is very clear that people have a right to keep a gun, and we have to respect, of course, the people's constitutional rights and acknowledge that we don't have a problem with responsible gun owners. But there is a place for common sense, reasonable restrictions on guns, and we passed some great measures on this last year, including universal background checks and red flag laws. But as we're taping this, we're just days past another horrific school shooting. And a major candidate for national office said earlier today that we should just accept this as a fact of life. I think that's outrageous. School shootings should not be a fact of life. Lockdown drills should not be a fact of life. No parent should be looking at the doors of their kid's school and wondering, are they thick enough? Is my kid safe at school? And we can do a lot better to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of people who would do harm to innocent people.
What are ways public education can be improved and supported by the Minnesota Legislature?
Well, there's two things. One is we can make sure our practices and methods match up with the best practices and methods that science is telling us are what will educate the kids best. So to give you an example, you know, you and I and probably everyone, a lot of people who are watching this, learned to read using the phonics system. But somewhere along the way over the last few decades, we moved away from using phonics to teach kids how to read to whole word recognition, which is not scientifically supported. No surprise, reading scores have declined. Just last year, we passed a bill to require phonics to be taught in our schools, and I'm hopeful that that will increase reading scores in the years to come. So we need the best methods and the best practices in our schools. Funding is also a consideration here. I graduated from Coon Rapids High School in 2002. State funding for education is still less today when you adjust for inflation than it was when I graduated from high school. We have to do better because also the burden from that is falling disproportionately on property taxpayers in Anoka County.
Should the Minnesota Legislature consider whether diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging, or DEI, has a place in schools and businesses? How could a statewide policy be implemented?
Well, diversity in Minnesota is a fact of life. We have a diverse population already. I know people around the country tend to think of Minnesota as a fairly homogenous state, but the reality is that this is an incredibly diverse community, and Coon Rapids and Anoka are very diverse communities, and that, I think, brings a lot of strength to our communities. And that's something, by the way, that's a little different than when I was growing up. It's become a more diverse community, and I think that that's a good thing. So recognizing that reality and embracing it, I think, is valuable for the whole state.
Should some books be banned from school libraries and classrooms?
No. I could just leave it at that, but I'll just say that we should not be in the business of banning books. I mean, that is something that comes out of a dark time in the 1930s, not something we do in Minnesota in 2024.
Should private school vouchers be allowed in Minnesota? Why or why not?
No, we should not do that because our public education system is not adequately funded, and this would take money away from our public school system. As I mentioned, class sizes in Anoka Hennepin schools are far too large, and a lot of teachers are still buying their own school supplies, and kids are having to pay exorbitant activity fees to participate in youth sports and activities. There's so much need there that if we're going to spend more money on education, it should be for public education.
Will you support Minnesota legislation to modernize the funding structure of the local community media stations like QCTV and allow cities to retain local control of rights of way and ensure that all providers pay their fair share?
I think that that's a really important issue that probably a lot of people who are watching are not necessarily familiar with, that these local TV stations really rely on fees from people who have cable TV subscriptions, and as more and more people are cutting the cord and moving to streaming and away from cable TV, these stations are losing their revenue. They provide essential services and local knowledge to people in this community, and we have to keep them around. So we do need to find a new funding source for these stations if we want them to stay, and of course I do. And I absolutely support the right of local communities to manage the public way and their public utilities.
What can Minnesota do to address the needs of our ever-growing senior population?
That's a great question. Minnesota is aging very rapidly, like a lot of states around the country. And there's a lot of things that we need to do, starting with making sure that people, if they want to stay in their home, have the ability to do so in an affordable way. And that means trying to keep property taxes down, increasing the property tax refund program, and doing other things to do affordability, to make being a senior citizen more affordable. Cracking down on these huge prescription drug companies that have record profits but are still increasing the price of their products year after year. One important thing we did this last year was we got rid of the tax on Social Security benefits for 75% of seniors. Seniors making less than $105,000 a year as a married couple or $78,000 a year as a single filer no longer pay Minnesota income tax on their Social Security. I'd like to go further and expand that to more seniors, but that was a great start.
Should Minnesota do more to ensure that seniors are safe and properly cared for in facilities such as nursing homes and assisted living?
Yes, we're not very far removed from terrible headlines about fraud, physical abuse, and other horrors happening in some of these facilities. We've made some good improvements and some important reforms at the legislature, but there's more that we can do. One area that I have focused a lot on, given my background as a prosecutor, is trying to crack down on white-collar crime and the types of scams that, that particularly impact senior citizen communities. These scams are going to get worse and worse as things like artificial intelligence allows for voice impersonations and other images to get way more sophisticated. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done to keep our senior citizens safe in the 21st century.
As a representative, how would you strive to protect women's reproductive freedom?
Well, we passed a bill last year into state law protecting reproductive rights in Minnesota, ensuring people have access to the reproductive health care that they need, whether that's IVF, contraception, or abortion. That's a decision fundamentally that belongs to a woman and her family and her doctor. The government doesn't have a role, and I was proud to vote for that bill. we should go further and enshrine that right in Minnesota's Constitution.
Should there be a ban to Minnesotans' access to birth control?
Absolutely not. As I just said, the decision about when and how to have a family is among the most personal decisions that anyone has to make. The government does not have a role there. It is up to each individual person to decide how they want to build their family and if they want to build their family and when. The government has no place in the bedroom.
Do you support Minnesota Equal Rights Amendment?
I do. I've voted for that several times, and I look forward to the opportunity to vote for it again until it becomes law. Every person in Minnesota deserves equal protection under the law, and we should enshrine that in the Constitution. I believe that even before I had 2 daughters, but now that I have 2 daughters, it feels even more personal to me.
How will you support women's issues, specifically pay equity and equal opportunities?
Yeah, that's really important in an age where women are still making less on the dollar than men for doing the same work. So part of it is, passing that Equal Rights Amendment would be a great step forward. Passing anti-discrimination laws or strengthening our anti-discrimination laws would be a great step forward in this regard. As I said, I've got 2 daughters, and I want them to grow up in a world where they feel like they are just as valid, just as equal as anybody else. And even more than that, I want all the little boys in the world to see my daughters as equals to them too. So we have a lot of work to do.
Should Minnesota provide paid family leave for every Minnesotan who works full-time?
So every other industrialized country in the world and many U.S. states have paid family and medical leave programs. And I'm really proud that in 2023, Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave bill into law that will take effect in 2026. When my daughters were born, I was lucky to be working at a law firm that offered paid leave. And so I was able to take 6 weeks with my older daughter and 4 weeks with my younger daughter. And I wouldn't trade that time for the world. Every parent should have that opportunity. And by the way, when we talk about how Minnesota is aging just a few minutes ago, this is another place where paid family and medical leave is really important. Because if you need to take a little time off work to take care of a sick parent or an aging parent or someone who just needs a little help, you should be able to do that without risking your family's economic health or losing your job.
What are your ideas for addressing affordable housing in Minnesota?
This is a critical issue in our community for 2 reasons. One, we have a lot of people who would love to buy a home and they can't find one that is in their price range. And 2, we have a number of people in our community who work in the construction industry who build houses for a living. So this is both an affordability issue and a jobs issue for Coon Rapids and Anoka. The number one thing we need to do is build a lot more housing in our communities. And the best way that the state can help by that is try to decrease some of the barriers to building housing. When I talk to builders, they tell me they can't build affordable starter homes in a lot of Minnesota communities because of pernicious regulations, rules about having to have a 3-car garage or having fancy brick siding on the outside drive up the cost of homes and make them unaffordable for thousands of Minnesotans. I've talked to parents who are frustrated that their kids are still living in their basement, that they can't find a place that's affordable to live. I've talked to young adults who wonder if they are going to have the same opportunities their parents did. We need to do a lot better on housing.
Can the Minnesota Legislature do anything to reduce the cost of groceries for families?
I think that we can do something to help. Obviously inflation is a national and even an international issue and there's a limit to how much Minnesota state government can do to control inflation. And it's also not really a tax issue because Minnesota sales tax does not, of course, apply to groceries. But one thing we can do is go after price gouging when that occurs. And I want to be clear that most businesses are not engaged in price gouging, but there are some who are, and we should hold them accountable for that, for profiteering off of other people's misery, for taking advantage of a terrible economic situation to earn just a little bit more money. There's so many large companies out there that are experiencing record profits and then still raising their prices, and we should hold them accountable for that.
Should Minnesota continue to provide free breakfast and lunches to public school students? Why or why not?
Absolutely, and how embarrassing that I didn't mention that a minute ago when I talked about how we can help families afford their grocery budget. Because of course, by taking breakfast and lunch off the table, off of the bill for parents of school-age kids, that is a major reduction for families' grocery budget. So that's a big thing there. But my wife is a teacher. And she, before this year when we had the free lunches, she kept a drawer full of granola bars and other snacks because she had that many kids in her school who weren't eating. And even aside just from the sort of humanitarian aspect of we don't want kids starving all day long, you can't learn on an empty stomach. There's no reason why any kid in Minnesota in 2024 should be sitting in school hungry because they can't afford breakfast or lunch. And I'm really proud that we passed that bill. I was proud to vote for it, and I'll fight to protect it.
Should Minnesota provide daycare subsidies for families who are struggling?
We have to find a way to make childcare more affordable in our community, and I'm open to any and all options. Minnesota has some of the most expensive childcare in the country. For a lot of families, their childcare budget, if you've got 2 or 3 kids needing childcare, your childcare bill exceeds your mortgage. That's not sustainable. For a lot of middle-class families, the biggest wealth-generating moment in their lives is when their youngest child goes off to kindergarten. We need to do better. And by the way, this is a workforce issue too, because there's a lot of people who say, boy, it just doesn't make sense for parent number 2 to go into the workforce if we're going to have to pay all that childcare. And so when we have a lot of businesses around Minnesota who are struggling to find workers, if we could make childcare more affordable, we would have better workforce. I'm open to subsidies. I'm open to looking at the regulatory scheme that we have around childcare. I'm open to any idea that will bring down the cost of childcare.
Should there be a cap on prescription drug costs?
This is another area where I'm open to any idea to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. It's frankly outrageous what large pharmaceutical companies are doing to Minnesotans, making them choose oftentimes between the drugs they need to live and the food or their rent or their mortgage, and that's a choice that no one should have to make. I passed a nation-leading bill last year to create a prescription drug affordability board to dig into the pricing of the most significant drugs in Minnesota to find out if there's price gouging going on, and then to place an upper payment limit if there is that type of activity going on. I think that this is a strong approach. We use it, for example, we have a Public Utilities Commission that uses a very similar approach for our energy bills to keep companies like Xcel and CenterPoint from charging us too much in the energy space, and I'm hopeful that same approach will work in prescription drugs.
Should there be a cap on out-of-pocket expenses for health care and for individuals and families?
I always say that health insurance isn't worth very much if it doesn't cover the care you need to live. And too much these days, insurance companies are excluding certain conditions from their policy coverage, or they're increasing copays and deductibles and other out-of-pocket costs to the point that the policy isn't really health insurance, it's hit by a bus insurance, by which I mean you have to have been hit by a bus or something that serious for your insurance to actually pay for any of the care you're receiving. So we need to do better there, and I'm open to caps. I'm also open to changing the way that we structure our healthcare system to provide more competition, including, by the way, competition from Minnesota Care, our state-run health insurance program that is exceptionally popular among the people that it serves. Every Minnesotan should have the opportunity to buy into Minnesota Care if that's what they want to do, instead of buying private health insurance.
Should Minnesota allow mining in or near the boundary waters?
No. And that's another one I could just leave at that, but I'll just tell you that I'm a co-author of the bill to ban mining in the Rainy River watershed. The boundary waters are the crown jewel of Minnesota. We need to protect it for future generations. I have no problem with mining. Mining has created amazing job opportunities for great portions of Minnesota and helped the steel that we mine the iron ore for here in northern Minnesota helped us win World War II. It's a great industry, but it doesn't belong in the boundary waters. And we can have mining in places where it's safe to do it and protect the boundary waters.
How should Minnesota address climate change and the factors that cause it?
Yeah, this is a critical issue because we've already seen we had one of the warmest winters on record this last winter. We're seeing more and more extreme weather events. And by the way, your homeowner's insurance premiums, if you're seeing those go up, as most Minnesotans are, sometimes by outrageous amounts, that's in large part due to the more and more extreme weather events, hailstorms and windstorms that are driven by climate change. We passed a 100% clean energy bill by 2040 bill that passed in 2023. We have been working to try and make it easier for people to buy electric vehicles if that's what they choose to do and create more infrastructure there. We need to do more around energy efficiency in people's houses, allow them to have the types of insulation and efficient appliances that will help them both save money on their electrical bills and save carbon from going into the atmosphere. There's just so much that needs to be done to confront this big challenge.
Should Minnesota provide subsidies for solar and EVs?
Well, we do provide subsidies for both of those things. We've had a long-standing program called Solar Rewards that helps people if they want solar on their rooftops, and I think it's been a good thing that's paid back to Minnesotans a lot of money. One thing, it's allowed us to create an industry around solar in Minnesota, both manufacturing panels. We have, I think, one of the only, if not the only, solar panel manufacturing facility in the country here in Minnesota, up on the Iron Range. But also, it allows people to, save money on their energy bills, which I think is a really valuable thing to do as well. I passed a bill in 2023 to help people afford their electric vehicles by getting rebates, and that was an immensely popular program, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to do.
What does clean and sustainable air, water, food, and agriculture mean to you?
It means Minnesota to me. It's what we're going to need to preserve our quality of life here in Minnesota. Minnesotans love the environment around them. They love the woods and the lakes and the rivers and everything around them. It's something that we pass between the generations. We can all imagine wonderful summer evenings sitting by a lake listening to loon calls. We want to pass that along to the next generation, but it means taking very seriously the problems that we have with air pollution. Today's a bad air day in a lot of Minnesota due to Canadian wildfires that are caused by climate change. We have to take that seriously. The Mississippi River, as it passes through Coon Rapids and Anoka, is an impaired waterway because of agricultural pollution coming in from the Crow River. I grew up swimming in that river. My kids swim in it now. I want my grandkids to be able to swim in that river, and it means that we're going to have to take strong action to protect it.
Is online sports betting a useful idea?
Useful is an interesting phrase to put. What I would say is that every state that touches Minnesota and Canada has legalized sports betting. It is something that will happen in Minnesota. We need to do it responsibly in a way that addresses big problems like problem gaming, for example. But the other thing is that if people want to bet on sports in Minnesota, and right now they can do it. They just go to shady offshore websites and illegal companies that are already doing this. That does no one any good. None of that money goes to tax dollars to the state to combat problem gaming or do anything else good. We should legalize and regulate, create a safe marketplace in Minnesota where if people want to bet on sports, they have the opportunity to do so.
And to end on kind of a fun note, if you had all the money, authority, and resources needed, what one thing would you do to improve the lives of citizens in Minnesota House District 35A?
Well, that is an interesting question. And there's so much I could say, but I only get one. So I'm going to go with education. I would have us have the best schools in the world. That is the secret for what makes Minnesota such a great place to live. We have this vibrant economy, more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any state in the country. And why is that happening? It's not because we have oil in the ground. It's not because we have the lowest taxes in the country. It's certainly not because we have great winter weather. It's because of our people. It's because of our highly educated, highly skilled workforce. And that doesn't just happen. That's something we have to build every single year in our public schools. And right now, we're seeing that atrophy. We're seeing our schools slip. And that is a critical threat to our future as Minnesota. So if I could do anything it would be to make us have the best schools in the whole world.
Thank you. Candidate Stephenson will now have 1 minute for a closing statement.
Well, I want to thank you again for having this forum and for all those great questions that everyone submitted. This was really a fun opportunity to talk with you about the issues that are facing Minnesota, and there are many. I hear about them every day when I'm out on the doors. I hear stories that make me smile and stories that make me very sad. You know, the other day I was talking to a woman in Anoka who told me that she hadn't had health insurance for many years, and she was just trying to hold out until she got on Medicare because she couldn't afford her health insurance. She said, I can either afford to have health insurance or I can pay the rent, and I'd rather sleep indoors. No Minnesotan should be making that choice in 2024. It's frankly outrageous, and we should go after these companies that are price gouging people and making those basic necessities of life unattainable and unaffordable. And that is what I'd like to do if I'm reelected to the Minnesota House.
Thank you. League of Women Voters thanks the candidate for speaking to voters about issues and for running for Minnesota House District 35A. Thanks viewers and those who submitted questions. Links to all forums are located at lwvabcmn.org. The general election is November 5th. Early voting starts on Friday, September 20th. Many cities offer early voting. Check the website for your city or contact the Anoka County Elections Office in the city of Anoka. You can register to vote, update your registration, find information on voting options, and find your polling place online at mnvotes.gov or the Minnesota Secretary of State's website. You can register or update your registration at your polling place on Election Day. The Minnesota Secretary of State website will tell you what documents to bring. If you're interested in League of Women Voters, visit our website at lwvabcmn.org. Everyone aged 16 and older is welcome to join. Your vote is your voice. Make your voice heard by voting in the general election.